I found myself wanting to get to know the composers as people, not just names in a textbook. I thought surely the circumstances and people in their life influenced the music they wrote. These men are icons. Even in the 21st century, their names are everywhere, and I wanted to know who they were. I wanted to know what it would have been like to have coffee with them, what people thought of them when they were alive, and what could have possibly inspired them so much that they were driven to write music that seems to have made them immortal. And to be honest, what I found blew my mind. These men, in many cases, led lives that were just as interesting and just as dramatic as the music they wrote. Some were womanizers, others were rebels, and some were so popular that riot police had to be called in to control the crowds. So after performances, I would start to share what I had read with a few people here and there. And I just watched as their eyes grew wide and they became totally captivated with what I was telling them. It changed the way they saw the music, and they loved it. So I thought there must be a way to share these fascinating stories with all of the people in the audience, and I was determined to find a way to make that happen.
It was a world that hadn't yet heard the name Mozart, one where the average life expectancy wasn't more than 35 years. In Austria, the finishing touches were being put on the exquisite Schönbrunn Palace, and in the rolling hills of central Germany, life was peaceful and simple.
The Men Behind the Music is a concert production where audiences are introduced to the life and times of composers through film segments. It was very important to me to give the audience a tangible look at life back then. The production starts with Johann Sebastian Bach, really one of my favorite composers, and although he's hugely famous now, his compositions really didn't receive much respect during his lifetime. It's explained to the audience that people thought he was kind of old-fashioned and out of date.
So while Clara Schumann would perform just over 100 years later for sold-out crowds controlled by riot police, Johann Sebastian Bach did not once have the experience of playing for a large concert audience. While Ludwig van Beethoven was proclaimed a musical genius in his time, Johann Sebastian was deemed old-fashioned and out of style. And while Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart spent his childhood touring Europe to adoring audiences, Bach never even ventured outside the one small region of Germany he called home.
Even his son, Carl Philipp Emanuel, was known to roll his eyes at his father at times. And after Johann Sebastian's death, his compositions barely even survived. Can you imagine?
A short 26 days before the birth of Johann Sebastian Bach, the boy who would become Bach's greatest contemporary was born in Halle, Germany, just over 100 kilometers from Bach's hometown. And while it seemed that the two were destined to share a close partnership and perhaps even friendship, the musical worlds of Georg Friedrich Handel and Johann Sebastian Bach could not have been much more different.
I really wanted to talk about Georg Friedrich Handel next. The story of his life is such a surprising contrast to the humble life that Bach led. The film talks about Handel's family, and unlike Bach, Handel did not come from a family of musicians. Handel's father actually was both a surgeon and a barber, which back then was the same profession. And of course, I couldn't avoid talking about Handel's musical world in London, with castrati running around, the audience throwing fruit and nuts, Handel's explosive temper, and all of that. production alternates between film and performance. Once the audience is introduced to the life of a composer, they hear a live performance of one of his compositions with a totally new perspective. And Mozart is introduced last, someone who could compose better on the spot than most musicians can after years, but at the same time lacked the practicality to lead a normal adult life. Audiences in Mozart's day, in Handel's day, had a drastically different experience attending concerts than we do today. They were not obliged to be totally silent during the performances, and they were permitted to boo or to applaud the performers at any time, even in the middle of the pieces. In that respect, going to a concert back then was very similar to going to a rock concert or a sports game today. They would eat, walk around, chat, and nobody would think twice. Of course, it's impossible to recreate the past, but these incredible compositions were written by men who led fascinating lives, and I love giving audiences a glimpse into their world.